At 7:42 in the morning, on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant William Carter knelt beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at Dobodura airfield, New Guinea. From a shadow of the aircraft, he watched his pilot, Lieutenant Robert Haze, go through his pre-flight checks with quiet determination. Haze was just 23, a young man with 6 missions behind him and not a single enemy plane to his name. Over the radio came word that 18 Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0s were already airborne, waiting to meet them. William knew Haze would soon be flying straight into their path, and likely into death itself. Carter had spent 8 months working on P-38 Lightnings and knew every bolt, wire, and rivet by heart. The twin-engine, twin-boom fighter was a marvel of speed and power, built to dominate the skies at high altitude. In a straight line, nothing could touch it. But Carter also knew its deadly flaw, the one that claimed American lives day after day. The P-38 simply couldn't turn with a zero. The Japanese Zero was a feather compared to the heavy, muscular P-38, light, nimble, and capable of dancing through the air with lethal precision. In combat, it could complete a horizontal turn in barely half the time the P-38 required, a margin that turned hesitation into death. U.S. flight doctrine drilled one rule into every Lightning pilot: never turn with a zero. Exploit the plane's speed and altitude instead. Dive fast, strike hard, then climb away before the enemy could react. Attack, escape, and live to fight again. Lieutenant Haze had followed that doctrine on 5 separate missions, and each time it had failed. The Zeros were cunning, anticipating every move, luring American pilots into dangerous turns, slipping inside their radius, and tailing them with deadly precision. In the past 6 weeks alone, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s. The majority of those losses came when pilots, unable to resist the enemy's trap, found themselves locked in turning battles they simply could not survive. Carter watched the pattern unfold with grim understanding. Carter had seen too many young men perish in the skies. Brave pilots, barely more than boys, climbed into their P-38s full of confidence, only to return in coffins, or not return at all. Official reports blamed pilot error, and instructors insisted the men had ignored proper doctrine. But Carter understood the truth. It wasn't the pilots who were at fault. The real danger lay in the P-38 itself, in the fragile, unreliable control cables that could fail at the worst possible moment, leaving skill and bravery powerless. The P-38's aileron control cables stretched through its twin booms to the tail, then ran forward through a series of pulleys to the wing surfaces. The system always had a bit of slack. Not much, maybe 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. But even that small amount caused a noticeable lag between the pilot's stick input and the aileron's response. At high speed, the delay was negligible, but during slow, tight turns it was deadly. That tiny fraction of a second often determined whether a pilot could outmaneuver a zero or end up shot out of the sky. Carter had brought up the issue with the engineering officer 2 months earlier. The officer insisted that the cable tension was within acceptable specifications and that the factory tolerances allowed for that small slack. Adjusting in the field would void the aircraft's warranty, he explained. Moreover, no mechanic on the base had the authority to alter flight control systems. Any modification required formal engineering approval from Lockheed, and Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California. Carter knew there was little he could do from the airfield. So, Carter did something that broke every rule in the Army Air Force's maintenance manual. He scavenged a piece of piano wire from a damaged P-38, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z shape, and fitted it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Haze's left aileron control cable. The entire job took only 8 minutes. That small modification added just 0.4 pounds of tension to the cable, but it was enough to remove the slack entirely, ensuring the aileron responded instantly, to every stick movement. No one noticed the change. The morning inspection crew was busy checking engine oil and ammunition, not the tension of aileron cables. Carter stayed silent. He watched as Lieutenant Haze taxied toward the runway, climbed into the cockpit, and lifted off, the P-38 slicing into the brightening sky, headed straight for the waiting Japanese fighters. What unfolded in the 17 minutes that followed would alter the way every P-38 in the Pacific Theater was flown, rewriting the rules of aerial combat forever. The first pilot Carter lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chun on July 9, 1943. Chun had only been in the combat theater for 3 weeks, and Carter had serviced his plane each morning without fail. They often spoke of California, Chun from Sacramento, Carter from Long Beach, and shared stories of working on cars before the war, a connection that made the looming dangers of the Pacific feel both personal and cruelly ironic. Chun lifted off at 6:15 in the morning on a routine fighter sweep. 2 hours later, he returned with 3 bullet holes piercing his left boom and a shaken story about a Zero that had slipped inside his turn. He explained that when he tried to roll and dive, as the manual prescribed, the P-38 responded sluggishly, almost as if it hesitated between his stick input and the aircraft's movement. The enemy fighter nearly got him, and it was only the quick intervention of his wingman, firing the Zero off his tail, that kept him alive. Carter listened, knowing the warning was more than technical. It was deadly real. Carter studied the bullet holes clustered in a tight pattern, textbook deflection shooting. The Zero pilot had predicted exactly where Chun's plane would be, leading his shots flawlessly. That shouldn't have been possible if Chun had rolled sharply and dove as the manual instructed. Clearly, the P-38 had lagged just long enough for the Zero to get the advantage. Chun never flew that aircraft again. It was sent back to the depot for repairs. 3 weeks later, Carter learned Chun had been killed in a different P-38 over Rabuel. The same tragic story repeating itself. Caught in a turning fight, unable to roll out fast enough. The second pilot Carter lost was Captain William Morrison, a seasoned flight leader with 11 confirmed kills. Morrison knew the P-38 intimately, its strengths, its weaknesses, and flew with calculated precision. On August 3rd, his flight engaged 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison scored a kill on his first pass, then lined up for another attack. But as he maneuvered for the second run, 2 Zeros unexpectedly reversed course, positioning themselves directly in his path. What followed would test both his skill and the limits of the lightning he commanded. Carter listened to the radio chatter after the mission. Morrison had attempted to roll inverted and perform a split S to escape. But over the radio, he reported that his controls felt sluggish and unresponsive. The Zeros stayed glued to him throughout the maneuver, eventually shooting him down at 4,000 feet. His wingman later said it appeared Morrison was fighting the controls, unable to get the P-38 to respond quickly. The Lightning crashed, and Captain Morrison was killed instantly. Morrison's crew chief, Rodriguez from Texas, was a friend of Carter's and immediately suspected something was wrong with the aircraft. After the wreckage was recovered, Rodriguez meticulously inspected every detail. Engine settings, control surface alignment, cable tensions, everything measured within factory specifications. Officially, the crash was attributed to pilot error, but Rodriguez refused to accept it. Carter felt the same way. Both men knew the truth didn't lie in mistakes or inexperience. Something deeper, something mechanical, had betrayed Morrison in the sky. By mid-August, Carter had seen 17 pilots lost in combat. Some were close friends, others he had only known during pre-flight inspections. Yet he had serviced every one of their aircraft. He had signed off their maintenance logs, watched them taxi toward the runway, and seen them lift off into the sky. Some returned safely, but many never came back, leaving only empty cockpits and the weight of another life claimed by the war. The pilots who survived told the same story. During tight maneuvers, the P-38 seemed sluggish, almost as if there was a faint delay between moving the stick and the plane responding. Most attributed it to the Lightning's size, its heavy frame and large control surfaces naturally causing some lag. But Carter knew better. He had felt that hesitation himself while working on the control cables. That seemingly insignificant slack in the system made all the difference, turning ordinary turns into dangerous, sometimes fatal, moments in the air. Carter began noticing the subtle sounds the control cables made while he tensioned them during maintenance. Each cable had a distinct tone, a low, sharp twang when plucked. Loose cables produced a noticeably different sound than tight ones. Carter could immediately tell the difference. Every P-38 on the line shared the same issue. The cables were slightly slack. Technically within specification, yes, but loose enough to affect responsiveness, creating a hidden problem that most pilots never realized until it was too late. One evening, after Morrison's death, Carter brought the issue to Rodriguez. Rodriguez asked if anything could be done. Carter replied, "Nothing through official channels, but unofficially, there's a way. It would work, but it means breaking regulations. And if we were caught, we could both face a court-martial." The problem wasn't a lack of understanding among American pilots. They knew exactly what to do. Every briefing stressed it, and every training flight reinforced it. Never turn with a zero. Rely on speed. Maintain altitude. Strike quickly, then break off. The rules were clear. The real challenge was that the reality of combat rarely followed doctrine, and pilots often faced situations the manuals couldn't prepare them for. Lieutenant Robert Haze had been stationed in New Guinea for 2 months. 23, a farm boy from Iowa, he had flown 6 combat missions without a single victory. Not for lack of ability, he was a competent pilot, but because he strictly followed the rules. And those very rules repeatedly placed him in situations where a clear shot was impossible, leaving him frustrated and vulnerable. On his 3rd mission, Haze descended from high altitude toward a zero, gaining speed up to 400 miles per hour and approaching from the sun, exactly as the manual advised. He brought the enemy fighter into his gun sight and began calculating lead for a deflection shot. Suddenly, the zero snap rolled to the left and dove sharply. Haze attempted to follow, but his P-38 responded sluggishly, as if wading through thick mud. By the time his aircraft finally aligned with the target, the zero had vanished. Frustrated, Haze pulled out of the maneuver and climbed back to altitude, empty-handed, without firing a single round. The 4th mission proved even more terrifying. At 15,000 feet, Haze and his wingman engaged 2 zeros. Haze fired his first burst, but missed, and the zero sharply reversed to the right. As he rolled to follow, his wingman shouted a warning. 2 more zeros were diving in from above. Haze attempted to level out and dive away, but his P-38 responded sluggishly, just enough that one of the attacking zeros scored a 3-second burst in a Haze's right boom with 20mm cannon shells. They didn't penetrate, but the shock forced Haze to break off the fight, engines smoking, and retreat toward base. On his 5th mission, Haze witnessed the death of his wingman, Lieutenant Thomas Parker, a 21-year-old from Boston with whom he had trained. On August 14th, during a dogfight over Finchhofen, Parker became separated from the formation. 2 zeros locked onto his tail. Parker fought desperately, rolling hard, reversing, attempting to scissor, but no maneuver could shake them. The enemy fighters stuck relentlessly, matching every evasive move, leaving Parker vulnerable and Haze powerless to intervene as the fight unfolded. Haze listened over the radio as Parker's voice cracked with panic, calling desperately for help. He heard Parker complain that his airplane wasn't responding fast enough. Then the sharp gunfires, followed by Parker's scream, and then silence. That night, Haze couldn't sleep, nor could most of the squadron. Parker's bunk remained empty, his personal belongings packed and sent home. His P-38 was officially recorded as a combat loss, the maintenance log showing no mechanical faults. The formal report blamed pilot error during defensive maneuvers, but Carter knew the truth ran far deeper. Carter had serviced Parker's P-38 on the very morning it went down. Every system checked out flawlessly. Engine timing exact, control surfaces aligned, cable tension right on specification. The aircraft was perfect, yet Parker was dead, and Carter knew the reason. That barely perceptible delay in the controls, the slight slack the manual deemed within limits, had doomed him, just as it had taken Morrison, Chin, and 14 more before them. The machine passed inspection. The flaw was buried in its design. The smell was the hardest part to escape. Each morning, as Carter stepped into the maintenance bay, the heavy mix of aviation fuel, scorched metal, and hydraulic fluid clung to the air. It was the scent of war in motion, of planes readied for battle. Some would return battered but intact. Others would vanish into the sky and never come back. And every dawn, Carter faced the same ritual, breathing that same choking air, tuning the same machines, watching young men climb into aircraft he knew might not save them. On the evening of August 16th, Haze walked into the maintenance bay and found Carter bent over his assigned P-38. The pilot's face was drawn, his voice low but urgent as he asked if there was anything at all, that could make the aircraft roll quicker. He didn't care about the rules, didn't care about regulations. All he wanted, he said quietly, was a fighting chance to stay alive. Carter met Haze's eyes and saw everything. The fear he tried to hide, the quiet desperation of a man already certain of his fate. There was no bravado left, only the plea of someone running out of time. Carter exhaled, wiped the grease from his hands, and said, "Come back in the morning. I'll see what I can do." Carter stayed in the maintenance hangar long after 11 p.m., working alone. The rest of the crew had turned in for the night, leaving only the low hum of distant generators and the soft drone of insects brushing against the lights above. The air was thick with the scent of engine oil and the heavy, damp tang of tropical humidity. Carter removed the inspection panel from the left boom of Haze's P-38, the sun-warmed metal radiating heat beneath his fingertips. Inside, the aileron control cable threaded through a network of pulleys leading to the tail. He gripped the cable firmly with both hands and tugged, immediately sensing the slack, roughly 3/8 of an inch before the tension engaged. His palms were streaked with grease, his fingers sore from hours of relentless maintenance work, yet the delay in response was unmistakable. Something was off. Carter took a piano wire, which came from a P-38 that had crashed during a ground loop 2 weeks before. The plane was a total loss, but Carter had salvaged anything of value before it was sent to the depot, including a 6-inch section of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He had stashed it in his tool bag without a clear purpose, but now, finally, its use was painfully obvious. He crouched on the hangar floor, a length of piano wire in one hand and pliers in the other, methodically bending it into a Z shape. The metal resisted, stiff and unyielding, and his hand slipped twice, drawing blood on his thumb the second time. Wiping the crimson streak on his coveralls, he pressed on. 8 minutes later, the wire was perfectly shaped. That Z bend would serve as an inline tensioner, adding precisely the right amount of preload to the control cable, erasing the slack that had cost so many pilots their lives. Installing the tensioner proved far more difficult. The boom's interior was cramped, forcing Carter to maneuver with one hand while clutching a flashlight in the other. The beam wavered, casting shifting shadows over the cable system. His shoulder pressed painfully against the metal framework, the edge biting into his arm. Beads of sweat slid down his back, stinging as they soaked his uniform, even though the night air should have been cool. Every movement required careful precision in the suffocating, confined space. Fitting the tensioner proved brutally difficult. Inside the narrow boom, Carter strained to maneuver the wire while keeping the flashlight steady, the flickering light making the shadows dance across the cables. His shoulder pressed painfully against the metal frame, scraping his arm, and sweat ran down his back, despite the cool night air, as he forced the wire into place with painstaking precision. Carter unhooked the cable at the pulley junction, his fingers fumbling with a stubborn clevis pin. It slipped, clattering somewhere deep inside the boom, and he spent what felt like endless minutes groping in the shadows until he recovered it. His heart raced, hammering in his chest. One wrong move, and the engineering officer could catch him tampering with a flight control system, risking a court-martial, a dishonorable discharge, or even prison. Yet the thought of Haze's life pushed Carter on. Failure was not an option. He slipped the piano wire tensioner into place between the cable end and the pulley, then reattached the cable. The connection was snug, and he had to push the clevis pin through with effort. Once it clicked into place, he tugged on the cable to test the tension. There was no slack. The control surface responded instantly, exactly as it should. Carter secured the inspection panel, gathered his tools, and wiped the blood from the wire in his hands. By 1:15 a.m., he stepped out of the hangar into the thick, humid night. The air hung heavy and still, broken only by the distant drone of engines, likely Japanese night raiders. The sound tightened his chest, a reminder of the danger waiting beyond. He had just altered a flight control system without permission, improvised with an unapproved part, and broken countless regulations. If the modification failed in the air, Haze would go down, and Carter would carry the blame. Yet if it held, it might save him. Carter lay on his bunk, eyes fixed on the ceiling, sleepless, waiting through the long hours until dawn. At 6:30, Carter made his way to the flight line, observing the crew as they fueled and armed Haze's P-38. He watched Haze stride toward the pre-flight briefing and climb into the cockpit with a quiet determination. By 7:42, the fighter roared down the runway and lifted into the brightening sky, joining a formation of 16 other planes heading northwest toward Japanese-held territory. All Carter could do then was stand silently and wait, heart tight with hope and fear. The battle began at 8:14. Haze led a flight of 4 P-38s against 9 enemy aircraft at 13,000 feet over the Huan Gulf. The sun rose behind them, glinting off wings and perfect for a diving strike. The element leader called the attack, and Haze's flight banked sharply, plunging into the oncoming formation with precision and speed. Haze targeted a 0, trailing the enemy formation, and dove from high altitude, accelerating to nearly 380 miles per hour. The fighter filled his gun sight, the rising sun emblem on its fuselage vivid, the pilot's head visible beneath the canopy. He squeezed the trigger. The P-38's 4.50 caliber guns and single 20mm cannon erupted in a storm of fire. Tracer rounds streaked through the air. Most missed, but a few struck the Zero's wing, sending sparks flying, enough to mark it, but far from enough to stop it. The Zero rolled sharply to the right and dove, and Haze followed. That's when he noticed the change. The P-38 responded instantly, without hesitation or lag. Every movement of the stick translated immediately into motion. Haze had never experienced anything like it. The airplane felt alive, anticipating his commands and executing them the instant he gave them, precise, fluid, and perfectly in sync with his intent. Haze rolled the P-38 sharply, completing a 90 degrees turn in what felt like half the usual time. He drove the nose down, bringing the Zero directly into his sights. He squeezed off a short burst. Tracer rounds streaked along the enemy fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Zero's engine erupted in flames, Debris scattered as the plane flipped inverted, plummeting toward the jungle below, black smoke trailing. Haze had scored his first kill, but there was no moment to savor it. Haze's wingman shouted a warning. Enemy Zeros diving from above. Haze looked up and spotted 3 fighters plummeting in a shallow, rapid dive. They had witnessed the death of their comrade and sought vengeance. He slammed the throttles forward, attempting to climb, but the Zeros closed the distance too quickly. Seconds separated him from attack. His only choice was to turn and fight. Every instinct urged him to keep climbing, to flee, but following Doctrine now would lead straight to death. Haze rolled sharply to the left and pulled hard. The P-38 responded instantly, snapping through the maneuver like nothing he had ever flown before. As his nose cleared the horizon, he spotted the lead Zero. It tried to follow, but hadn't anticipated Haze's sudden reversal. The enemy fighter was vulnerable. Haze aimed, fired, and struck the left wing. It collapsed. The Zero spiraled out of control. 2 kills achieved in just 30 seconds. The remaining 2 Zeros attempted to scissor him, switching directions to force an overshoot. Haze kept pace effortlessly. Each time they changed course, his P-38 responded immediately, rolling and turning without hesitation. There was no lag, no struggle with the controls. The aircraft obeyed every command precisely, as if it had been transformed, freed from invisible burdens that had previously slowed its movements. Flying it felt completely different, almost like piloting a new plane altogether. One of the Zeros over-rotated, turning too sharply and losing precious airspeed. Haze slipped inside the maneuver, closing to maybe 200 feet. He fired, unable to miss. The enemy aircraft tore itself apart, fragments tumbling past Haze's canopy. The P-38 shuddered as pieces struck the right boom. 3 kills. The 4th Zero broke away. Low on fuel and ammunition, Haze didn't pursue. He climbed back to altitude, rejoined the remnants of his flight, and they set course for home. The entire dogfight had lasted only 7 minutes. When Haze touched down at Dobodura at 9:03, Carter was already on the flight line. Shutting down the engines, Haze climbed from the cockpit, hands trembling, flight suit drenched in sweat. He strode directly to Carter and said only 2 words. It worked. What neither Haze nor Carter understood was that 6 other pilots had observed the engagement from above. Captain Frank Mitchell, flying at 15,000 feet and serving as a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group, had been tracking Haze's element as they tangled with the Zeros. Something immediately caught his attention. Haze's P-38 responded with astonishing speed, snapping through rolls and turns as if the aircraft weighed only half its actual mass, performing maneuvers no Lightning Mitchell had ever witnessed. Mitchell knew every pilot flying in the theater and was familiar with their abilities. Haze was skilled, but not extraordinary, yet today had been different. Something about his aircraft was unusual. After the mission, Mitchell caught Haze in the debriefing room. Adrenaline still thrummed through him, hands trembling as he completed the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked what had changed. Haze admitted he didn't know. His plane had simply responded faster, smoother. When Mitchell inquired about maintenance, Haze pointed toward Technical Sergeant Carter, suggesting he was the one who might explain it. 2 hours later, Mitchell located Carter in the maintenance bay, hunched over another P-38. Grease coated his hands, and hydraulic stains marked his coveralls. Mitchell confronted him bluntly. "What did you do to Haze's aircraft?" Carter met his gaze silently for a moment, then answered steadily. "I installed the piano wire tensioner, modified the cable, and made an unauthorized adjustment to the flight control system." Mitchell stayed silent, letting Carter explain every detail. When Carter finished, Mitchell asked if the same modification could be applied to his P-38. Carter agreed, but warned him of the dangers. It was untested, unauthorized, and failure could mean serious consequences for both of them. Mitchell didn't hesitate. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight over the past month, all trapped in turning battles they couldn't evade. If there was any chance to improve survival, he wanted it. Rules could wait. That evening, Carter worked on Mitchell's P-38, installing the piano wire tensioner exactly as he had on Haze's aircraft. The next morning, Mitchell flew it and returned exhilarated, praising the change. "It rolls like a fighter, not a lumbering truck," he told his wingman. The wingman, impressed, immediately asked Carter to make the same modification to his own plane. By August 20th, Carter had upgraded 9 P-38s. The news circulated quickly through the squadron. Pilots began asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some chiefs refused, citing regulations, but others agreed to try. Carter demonstrated the process, cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner. It took 8 minutes and transformed the aircraft's handling completely. The modifications spread quietly, passed from pilot to pilot and mechanic to mechanic. There was no official record, no engineering approval, just hushed talks in the ready room and maintenance bays. On August 22nd, Haze used the upgraded controls to down 2 more zeros. Mitchell followed with 3 kills on August 25th. Gradually, more pilots returned from missions with confirmed victories, and the results were undeniable. Lieutenant James Watkins, a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group at Gussap, first heard about the modification from a pilot recently transferred from Dobodura. Skeptical, Watkins applied it to a single aircraft. After the next mission, the pilot returned with his first kill in 8 weeks. Encouraged, Watkins modified 4 more planes, and soon other crew chiefs in the 49th were adopting the same change across their aircraft. By early September, roughly 40 P-38s across New Guinea had been outfitted with the modification. The engineering officer at Dobodura sensed something unusual but couldn't determine what. During inspections, control cable tensions appeared correct because crew chiefs removed the tensioners beforehand and replaced them afterward. The pilots understood, the mechanics understood, yet no one informed the officers. The secret circulated quietly, hidden in plain sight, spreading steadily through the squadron without official approval. The combat balance began to change. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every 0 they shot down. By August, the ratio improved to about 1.3 to 1. By September, losses and victories nearly matched. Something had altered the fight, but officially, no one could say what. By late August, the Japanese began to take notice. Fighter pilots of the 11th Air Fleet reported that American P-38s were behaving differently in combat, executing tighter rolls, reversing course with unexpected speed, and responding faster in dogfights. Maneuvers that had reliably trapped Allied aircraft for months now faltered. Carter's modifications had quietly begun to tip the scales in ways the enemy could not yet fully understand. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most accomplished aces with 64 confirmed kills, had battled American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, over Waiwak, he encountered a P-38. Relying on his usual tactic, Sakai lured the American into a turning engagement, anticipating the P-38's roll, then reversed sharply to slip inside the fighter's turning radius, seeking the advantage he had relied on for years. But this time, the P-38 matched his maneuver. Sakai, who had performed this tactic countless times, knew precisely how long a P-38 needed to roll. Yet this fighter spun faster than expected. Sakai narrowly avoided a direct collision as the American lined up his guns. Forced to dive away, he managed to escape, returning to base both baffled and frustrated by the unexpected performance of his opponent's aircraft. Other seasoned Japanese pilots described the same experience. The Americans had not changed their tactics, yet their planes reacted more swiftly. The difference was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to throw off the timing Japanese pilots had relied on for months, undermining maneuvers that had previously worked flawlessly. Japanese intelligence scrambled to uncover the cause. They studied the wreckage of downed P-38s, but discovered no visible alterations. The planes appeared identical to those they had battled for months, the same engines, the same weaponry. On the surface, nothing had changed, leaving them puzzled and frustrated by the sudden shift in American performance. What the Japanese failed to realize was that the difference lay hidden inside the P-38's boom, a 6-inch length of piano wire, indistinguishable from factory parts. Even if discovered, its function would have been obscure. It wasn't a new engine or weapon, merely a subtle adjustment to the control cable tension, but that tiny alteration was wreaking havoc, sending their pilots to the ground. By mid-September, Japanese aviators were losing planes to P-38s at a pace unseen since the war's opening months. The effect on morale was profound. For 2 years, Zero pilots had ruled the skies through superior agility, certain they could outturn any American fighter. Now, that certainty was crumbling. The edge that once defined them was slipping away, and with it their confidence. Veterans who once attacked without hesitation began to falter, unsure whether their trusted maneuvers could still keep them alive. The Japanese sought new tactics. Some pilots abandoned dogfights with P-38s, turning instead to quick hit-and-run attacks, but doing so meant surrendering their greatest strength. The Zero's power lay in its agility. By fighting like a P-38, they were forced into the enemy's game, one where speed, firepower, and durability favored the Americans, leaving Japanese pilots at a growing and deadly disadvantage. Some pilots responded with boldness, diving closer before shooting and taking greater risks. Yet aggression alone, without the edge of superior maneuverability, only hastened their deaths. In September, several seasoned Japanese aviators fell while attempting tactics that had been flawless just 2 months earlier, revealing how swiftly the balance in the air had shifted. The core challenge for Japanese pilots was confronting an invisible adversary. They sensed a shift in the air, but couldn't identify its source or find a way to respond effectively. It was impossible to craft strategies against an unknown change, leaving them exposed and struggling to adapt to a threat they could neither fully understand nor anticipate. By late September, the 11th Air Fleet had suffered the loss of 38 fighters in clashes with P-38s, while American forces lost only 22 planes during the same period. The balance of power had shifted. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were downing Zeros at a rate exceeding 1-to-1. Japanese command responded by instructing pilots to engage P-38s only when holding a clear numerical advantage. This directive marked a decisive turning point. The Zero was no longer the predator but the prey, and the shift traced back to a single, unapproved modification, a piece of piano wire. The modification was never officially adopted during the war. In October 1943, the Army Air Force Engineering Command discovered it when a maintenance inspector at Dobodura noticed irregular cable tension readings. Investigating further, he traced the issue to the piano wire tensioners, documented his findings in a report, and forwarded it through the chain of command. The report remained on desks for 3 weeks as officers debated their course of action. The modification clearly broke regulations, yet its effectiveness was undeniable. Squadrons using it achieved higher kill ratios, and pilots were returning alive. The real issue wasn't its impact. It was deciding whether to discipline the mechanics who installed it without approval or to tacitly sanction the change after the fact. In November, Lockheed dispatched an engineering team to New Guinea to assess the modification. They conducted thorough evaluations, testing performance, measuring cable tension, calculating stress loads, and performing flight trials. Their findings confirmed the change was both safe and effective, something that ideally should have been included in the original design. Lockheed incorporated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J, which entered production in December 1943, yet Carter received no official recognition, no commendation, medal, or report acknowledgement. Official Lockheed records credited the improvement to engineering analysis, omitting Carter's contribution entirely. Haze lived through the war, completing 63 combat missions and shooting down 11 Japanese planes. Returning to Iowa in 1945, he married his high school sweetheart, raised 4 children, and spent 37 years as a crop duster. He never forgot what Carter had done. Every August 17th, Haze called to personally thank him for saving his life. Mitchell survived the war as well, rising to squadron commander and leading his unit through the Philippines campaign while shooting down 16 enemy aircraft. Afterward, he remained in the Air Force, retiring as a colonel in 1963. He shared the story of Carter's modification with every young maintenance officer he oversaw, emphasizing that the most effective solutions often come from enlisted mechanics who notice what engineers overlook. Carter remained in the Army Air Force until 1946, then returned to California and resumed working on cars, opening his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He spent 42 years repairing engines, but rarely spoke of the war. When asked, he simply said he was a mechanic, fixing airplanes, and that was all. In 1991, a military historian investigating P-38 modifications discovered mentions of the piano wire tensioner in New Guinea maintenance logs. The researcher tracked down Carter through veteran registries. By then, he was 73 and still working part-time in his garage. When asked about the modification, Carter confirmed it, insisting it wasn't remarkable, just a necessary task that had to be done. Carter remained in the Army Air Force until 1946, then returned to California and resumed working on cars, opening his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He spent 42 years repairing engines, but rarely spoke of the war. When asked, he simply said he was a mechanic, fixing airplanes, and that was all. William Carter passed away in 2006 at the age of 88 and was laid to rest at Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary noted his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic, but made no mention of the piano wire tensioner, the way he transformed American fighter performance, or how he had defied regulations to save lives. Carter's garage in Long Beach remains, though it has a new owner. In the back office hangs a faded photograph, a young mechanic in coveralls beside a P-38 Lightning. On the back, the date reads August 1943, New Guinea, a silent testament to the man and the work that quietly shaped history. That's how real innovation occurs in war, not through official channels or committees, but through sergeants and mechanics like Carter who spot problems, create solutions, and act without waiting for permission, driven by the need to save lives. If you found Carter's story as compelling as we did, please like this video. Your support allows us to share more overlooked World War II histories. Subscribe to stay connected to these untold stories, each one significant, each one deserving to be remembered. We'd love to hear from you. Share a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you for watching and for helping preserve these stories, including Carter's, so they continue to inspire and be remembered.